Okay, so we've gotten to the stage now with this terrain modeling. It's all pretty much sculpted in. You can see the different media here. There's some foam, fast mash for rock sculpture, which is excellent for doing it if you're patient with it and you get a feel for it. And you can work it with a brush and a knife, as I've shown earlier on. And then there's the water surfaces here. And then there's some cell clay here. So what I'm going to do now that this is pretty much finished, this sculpt in that sense, you can see the foam backing here. I'm going to skin it with 40 thou evergreen plastic. You can get these larger sheets if you special order from your hobby shop. They come in all different sizes. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use matte medium for plastic to foam, but down here I've used CA. I rough sand the inside of this with 60 grit, crisscross with rough sandpaper, and onto this painted surface here that's also been sanded. So if you use CA, it's not going to come off. It's going to stay on there. So now with this, I'm going to use matte medium because matte medium clings to plastic, styrene plastic well, because it's an acrylic, and it also clings to foam really well. But I'll do that later. I'll just dribble some down in there and then just tape that. And then I'll resculpt this in with cell clay or fast smash. And if it pulls away, I'll just fill it with matte medium and terrain soil or media, okay, just to clean up the edge. And then this will leave a really nice, clean surface to paint. You can use wood for this if you want, or veneer, or basswood. I chose to use plastic because this is going to be painted black, or there might even be black velvet on here if it goes into a shadow box, just to help absorb light, because there'd be a space all around this when it's inside the box. So that's what I'm going to do, but I want to beef up this corner. So what I'm going to do is I take some number 297 angle. It's a larger profile, okay, and I basically just scribed a line just to keep it square. And I'm going to use solvent. I'm going to drop this piece in like this, okay, on that line. And that way, when I put in the next piece, it'll give me a nice plastic surface to weld that corner, okay, just to ensure, structure integrity. I like to do that. I know it's a little bit sort of my OCD cabinet building skills coming in, but that's part of it, right? You want to make sure that it doesn't come apart on you. So okay, especially if you're going to go into a show. If you're going to a show and you don't think these things through, what'll happen is the day you're going in and it goes on the table, this starts to crack or something. So anyway, and then I'll do the same on this side, and then I'll run a piece along here, and then I'll just fill that and touch that up with some white paint. Then I got a nice canvas to look at and to start painting, and that's when the fun begins. Okay, you can see I got the sides on. It's all skinned with 40 thou plastic, CA to the bottom wood frame. So I got a bit of a gap here. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to leach in some matte medium. Okay, just a bit to get down there to help bind the top part of it, and then I'm going to cap it off with some cell clay or fast smash. Once the matte medium cures, it'll help hold this plastic, which is already nice and straight. And I'll just put that in just to fill some of the gap, because it's very thin and viscosity is high, and it'll just drip down in there, give it some extra adhesive quality, because there will be some movement with humidity changes, etc., and you want to make sure you have a good bond. So when that's dry, I'll just clean this up with cell clay and fast mash just to trim it off, and then just trim the plastic nice, just so that it has a nice clean edge. And then the same goes for the front here. I'll just trim this down to where the water level is. And then this has already got matte medium in it, and just clean it up, okay? The one advantage of skinning your diorama base with plastic like this, in this case 40 thou, is it's very easy to trim. I mean, basswood is too, but there's something about plastic that's just has a nice feel to it. So before I tweak this up with some cell clay, you can see there's wicked in some matte medium, so this is nice and solid now. It's C8 plastic to wood, and then this matte medium where the foam is. This is a nice seal here. I'll just trim this edge up so that I get a nice clean seam, terrain seam. The idea is picture a big square cookie cutter. The idea of a diorama base is that big square cookie cutter just comes down on a section in the real world and cuts it out. Right? Of course, you get to compress and enhance with artistic license, the drama and detail. But that's the idea. That's why you have the different profile. Okay. Okay, I just want to point this out. So here's some fast mash, okay, by Activa again. Just mix a bit of water, kept it quite thick. So I'm just going to fill in or backfill the diorama base into the casing or the framework or fascia, whatever you want to call it. Now, what will happen when this dries, it might pull away from the plastic, which is fine. The plastic will pop away a little bit. That's okay. Like, let it dry, let it shrink, let it settle in. Then you can tweak it with matte medium all the way along. You can just filter in a little bit of matte medium, which is excellent acrylic adhesive for dry paper mache to plastic, and then you can just skim coat it again if you want. You don't have to use fast mash. You can use clay or air dry clay if you want or whatever, but I just find that this stuff is really stable. Once it sets up, shrinks, and is dry and hard, it's it doesn't move like maybe wood would move, or clay would crack, or plaster would crack as well. Okay. Okay, the white canvas. So here we are. So I've basically whited out this space, and look, there are many different ways to paint terrain. There's a lot of people out there doing it. I've been doing this kind of thing since I was a kid, so I have my own method, that I've evolved over the years. Like so you gotta just, like, it's a learning curve, like, that never ends. So you mature in it, and then you vary your style and method to achieve certain results. Sometimes it's the same result, sometimes it's different. There's different styles of painting. There's the oversaturated look, there's the desaturated look. I'm more of the latter. I like to paint with the desaturated style, because by the time you put lights on it and shadow, it just looks more realistic to me. If you go with the sort of oversaturated, opaque, what I call comic book style, as opposed to cinema, you end up with this really bright, look. And you see that now in the model building diorama genre out there with the younger generation. They like to paint that way. I understand why they do it. There's a lot of reasons why they do it. It's more dramatic. It pops more. It's great for social media because, let's face it, that's like on YouTube, that's what it is. It's media. So they want it to be really flashy. And there's other reasons too, right? Like if you go to a show and plop your model down and there's 500 models or 300 or 100 or 50, you want your model to stand out. So I like to paint with washes and filters and layers, and I like to use an airbrush. I like to use a traditional brush. I like to use acrylics and oils. So, and how I apply them is up to each individual. I change it. Like on another given day, maybe I paint this whole terrain pure raw umber, the whole thing, not black. I don't like black. I only use black for, like I'll use black probably here on the outside of these edges when it's done. Why? Because it's going to go into a box diorama, a shadow box. So you're not going to see any of this, and I don't want it to reflect light onto the backdrop that'll be behind this. Okay. I want to just put washes of umbers on this because wherever it runs, I'm okay with, because I'm going to airbrush the stone and the rock first, and all the dark engravings where the umber runs, I'm going to leave elements and residual stains, etc., so that it works with the terrain in that three-dimensional look, that it creates with shadow and light, right? So we all do it differently, and there's a lot of people doing it out there. So you got to take, whatever you can, and just find what you're comfortable with. Okay, all right. So yeah, the canvas, the white canvas. I just want to say, about this, the artist mystique, or the artificial mystique, I call it. I know that I've even been guilty of sort of waxing eloquent about procedures and methods and things, but, I really think a lot of times it's just a lot of hogwash. I think, it's just really trying stuff. I don't even, half the time I don't even know what I'm doing, because I'm always trying to do something differently. So it's always sort of a bit of a journey of experimentation. I mean, after a while, you just see light and shadow. That's like, if you can train yourself to just try to, like a negative from an old photograph, just try to see light and shadow as you paint. Color becomes secondary, and it'll find its way into the work on its own if you just think of, light and shadow. Like, for example, here, all I'm doing is putting a wash up underneath the overhang where it's going to be dark anyway. Like, if you looked at any photo, this is going to be really dark under there, And I just wing it most of the time. And that's all it is. That's all we do, really, right? That's all we really can do. If you try to systematize things, it just becomes silly, I mean, I know there's systems. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I remember back in the Shepherd Payne, Francois Verlinden era, when everybody was building, got into dioramas because of the sheets that he had. And, man, that guy inspired a nation of modelers, right? And Verlinden had this what he called the system of how to paint figurines. And I remember I wasn't that great at painting figurines back then because I didn't do it a lot, but I knew that I needed to, to set off the, the armor, on the diorama, let's say, or whatever. And so he introduced this system, or it was over enamels where you'd use oils. And I actually read the book and did it, and it actually worked. And I still use it to this day because I like it. I'm comfortable with it, And it actually transformed my painting. I actually won, I think, 2 or 3 times Best Historical Figure at IPMS shows in the early 90s, I remember, when I applied the Verlinden way, the Verlinden system. But, at the end of the day, you got to find your own system. Like, you just have to try stuff and keep your paint thin, build up layer after layer after layer. Be patient and enjoy the process. And in that process, you will learn things that you never realized you could learn, or you'll never figure out it from reading a book. Because if you don't do the practical, like none of it's going to make sense, Notice how I have this diorama up sideways because I want it to fall down into this plane here, this edge. So if you don't just do the practical, like try stuff and just start applying, and that's all really a model railroad or a diorama is you just throwing muddy water around. James mentioned that. He pipes in once in a while. He's a theater guy. I was in theater and film. I understand it too. It's really, I know it's a generic term. It probably doesn't do the art of painting the diorama justice, but that's all it really is. Moving around muddy water, etc. And then laying on another layer and fixing all the mistakes as you go. Right? That's all it is. Like, there's a lot of mystique, artificial mystique on YouTube, but it's just people that have the, the opportunity, the privilege, or they have made that privilege for themselves. Like, they have created it through hard work. And so now they have an advantage because they get to do it all the time. So if you're practicing it, you're just bound to get better at it. It doesn't matter who you are. Because at the end of the day, it's not about who's really better than the other person. It's more about a trend or a style that's exposed and being embraced by the popular culture, right? And if you keep practicing, keep trying stuff, you're just going to get better at it. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what the genre is either. So don't get too hung up on artificial mystique of the artist, right? And don't let it bother you about, like don't let the stigma affect your masculinity or femininity, because it has nothing to do with that, right? It's a virtue to be artistic. It's a great thing. Like, most people are that I've met and taught, like in school and in the arts. And I don't know how many people that never realized that they had it. They never considered themselves an artist, but when they finally said, yeah, I guess I am, the look on their face, the explosion of creativity on their life liberated them. And they're okay with it, So don't get hung up on the artist mystique. Just have fun, create, and reward yourself, and watch your creative skills grow. So here's the second phase of cutting in with the dark umber. You can see now I did it with the brush first to get into all the really tight cracks and all the the real fine engravings, and then I've gone over it with the airbrush to soften everything, to soften all the areas where the shadow's going to be. Okay, with Tamiya now. So it's the 2 layers of golden by hand, white, and then umber washes, and then just Tamiya umber, which once again is black and brown 50-50 pigment color, and then 70% IPA, 30% paint. And I just cut in all the shoreline, all underneath, in amongst the rocks. And now I'm going to slowly go over all of it, very just in a very relaxed state, which is a lot of fun, this part, cutting in all the rock with JN Gray as a base. Because the rock's going to be quite light, and then I'll put another wash on top later. I'll probably use oils in this area here because of the richness of oils and the transparency on all the rock work. And I'm not going to worry too much about up here because it's going to be covered with ground cover anyway. And some might show through, but a lot of it will get covered, so I didn't paint all of it. And there'll be big trees in here covering, and a big maple here, so you won't see any of this. This hole here is where that big old growth cedar is going to go, so that'll get cellulite clayed into place eventually. And so I'm going to work the low creek bed here with grays, etc. Okay, so you can see I've airbrushed in the gray now. Not a complete opaque cover. You can see there's still umber in the shadows of the rocks, etc. Okay, so that's what I use. I use XF12J in gray for a lot of my rock work, but that's just me though, right? Like everybody has their own, color choice that they like. And then what I do is I come in with like Vallejo USAF light gray 71.296, cement gray 71.045, gray blue 71.103, and then a pale blue gray 71.046. So I just put water on and I just dab colors in and move it around. I don't have a system really. Well, I sort of do, but it's not really, it doesn't make sense. Right? Because I have the color in my mind from my photos. I have my photo references hanging up above. And I look at them and I get the color and I see certain colors, and a lot of it's light though. A lot of it's not color that you're seeing, it's the light. You can even put a light right on the photo and it'll change it. But what you're seeing is sunlight coming through the trees. It hits moss, it hits rock, there's shadows, there's light, there's greens, there's grays. It goes on and on like this, and the only way you're going to develop a style or get the color down is try some of these base colors. So this is just umber, right? To me, a sprayed umber and then J.N. gray. That's it. So that's a good start. And then I like to put the Vallejo watercolors on because I think they make excellent color shades for groundwork. One of the best. And I don't use pastels or chalks on any of my models or dioramas. Ever. Never. Maybe one little pinch one time. That was it. But never usually use it. I just, I'm not interested in using pastels and chalks on my models. I don't agree with them, so I don't think they belong on a model, but that's just me. Okay, so I'm going to put washes on this, and then I'm going to highlight parts that I want highlighted, and I'm going to work it with a brush. I could do it with oils, but I like watercolor because they're clean and they're not stinky. And then I'm just going to look at it and just keep working it until it clicks. Okay. Okay, so let me just say this. Remember how I talked about pin washes, or there's that method out there, pin wash, where you put a dark wash and it runs in all the cracks? Don't be afraid to do it with light colors too. Nobody's doing it. And they just don't do it. And I don't know why, but try it out and see what happens, right? You can always chase it later with a thin black wash or gray wash or umber wash at the end. But it does, it reflects off the edge. Right, so when you have a groove like this, light will hit one side and won't hit this side. So if you pour dark, both sides would be dark. But if you put a light wash in, then you get the light wash, and then you can look at it and put a dark, So don't be afraid to try different methods. Just because somebody's doing one method, don't be afraid to try something that you want to experiment yourself, okay? Okay, so this is a good time for just a quick update. So I'm still working the different grays, and now I'm using a sponge, okay? And I want you to try that too if that's what you're feeling motivated to do. Put washes on 2 or 3 with just water. Just let each layer dry. Doesn't matter dark or light. It really doesn't matter initially at first. Okay, you can put a dark pin wash at the very end to make some of it pop. But you can actually do a lot of the lighter colors. You want to make the rock really light, so when you do put a darker wash on, it won't darken all the rock too dark. So I take a sponge and then I start putting on a little bit slightly darker speckling, like just a wet sponge. I dry this and then just go over it like this with a sponge. Very gradual shift in color, okay? So there's around 6 colors. Find 6 grays that are close. Vallejo hashtag no sponsor, okay? But they're good paints for this. They're one of the best scenery paints, especially for dioramas and areas like parking lots and rock faces on model railroads. And then just take a sponge, and as each layer dries, you can use a blow dryer. Just stipple it on with a really wet sponge straight into the paint. Okay, here I'll show you. Okay. Don't worry about getting it on the brown areas, because you're going to be covering that anyway. So you just want to stipple it on and then just leave it. It's wet. It won't be that noticeable. Let it dry and do it again. And then you'll get a kind of a really good speckled color graduation in your rock. And then once it's all dry, you can put pin washes on it where it'll go into all these little cracks and crevices and into all the little texture on the rock and make it pop, okay? Okay, so this is probably a good point for a little bit of a summary. So a lot of what you see here over the cell clay now is just sifted sands and dirts that's been dried for, I mean, you don't have to dry it for very long, but I have coffee cans and yogurt cups full of natural ground base material for decades. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I was collecting dirt. Anyway, you can see some of this. This is a mixture of dried leaves, not the static grass, and just debris and sticks and just stuff that's been dried and basically preserved in the sense that it's like it's wood, so it's not really going anywhere. And it was just made into a slurry of matte medium. So now it's like hard. All this is hard. It's all just paper mache and foam and just mostly natural detritus and dried leaves and sticks and whatever ground up. Okay, and then when I laid this when I made this sort of slurry up, I sort of packed it on, and then before it dried, I just took static grass, pinch and stab. I've shown that in previous videos on River Road, and it just pinch and stab straight in. Didn't have to add glue because it's already wet with matte medium, and matte medium you can dilute it till the cows come home and it'll still glue things. So that's what I love about it. When it dries, it leaves a fairly matte finish that takes paint well, okay? And then, so this is dried since yesterday, so after I've stabbed in clumps of static grass, I just brush it off. Give it a good brushing with a big bristle brush. Work off all the loose, mostly static grass. You can see it here. This is the second brushing. The first, a little more came off. And then I want to work away any loose material so that I can, do the next layer, the next phase. There's dioramas that are going to be successful or have an impact or pop are going to be models or dioramas that have infinite layers, like layer after layer after layer built up. It'll show. And I mean, that's what the real world is like. So the more layers, the more time you spend looking it over, you know, turning it around, looking at different angles, thinking things through, studying photographs, doing your research. I go to locations because I model the region I live, so I'm familiar with it. You should model what you're familiar with. Even though modeling from a photograph from a region you've never been is completely doable and possible. But it's layer after layer after layer. Like this rockwork is just based out. It'll get painted more with washes. It'll get moss on it. There'll be lumber, piles of dead wood from, you know, the creek rising and lowering and washouts, etc. And then there's trees. That all has to be done too, all the vertical scenery as opposed to the horizontal scenery. So a really effective diorama, or one you're going to be confident in or happy with, is going to have a multiplicity of layers like the real world.